Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Coin Drop Podcast. This is episode 81, and joining us for our very first ever exclusive dev interview, we've got Iron Taxi, one of the lead devs on the upcoming EXFIL. Joining me tonight.
Great job.
Yeah, 81 episodes. You'd think I'd learn how to talk by
Yay.
now. Joining me tonight, because Tim is unavailable, Mike is with us. So, Mike, welcome back to the host chair. And Strix is already in the chat here saying words are hard. Sure. Indeed, they are, my friend.
I'm standing.
So,
what chair do I have?
I don't know. It's one of them. There's three of them here. So, with three people. You got one. Anyways, let's go ahead and start this off. We've got some housekeeping Mike's going to talk about real quick. Then we are going to get into talking with our guest here. So, Mike, what do you got?
So last week's stream, Tim had mentioned the hundreds of millions of streamers for the VGA's viewers. Yes. When I did the VOD side for the YouTube, I added the video and I put in 2023 as a correction just to keep accuracy, because there was no official number posted by the VGAs at the time. Now there is. It's 154 million.
That sounds
people
right.
Watched.
Yeah,
154 million people watched the VGAs, which is an insane number because again, it's like triple the Grammys.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
So for those of you who also don't know, Mike did a special edit for our VOD side. So the stream now is going to be very different than what the VOD actually gets posted on YouTube. He adds some extra polish to that to make it a little bit more interesting than the very rundown PowerPoint, I guess, design is what I got here. Somebody called it a PowerPoint once. And I was like, yeah, that's not inaccurate. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, man. I'm just here to talk. All right. So, Iron Taxi, it's great to finally have you here, man. We kind of set this up a long time ago. You went on a brief vacation and things fell through the cracks. So, why don't we jump in and talk about EXFIL? Start off with kind of how, I guess, the process has been for you. We did a play test, actually, back when we were talking about doing that initial interview. You did like an early access thing. How did that go? How was the results of that play test?
I think it's like, it's a little bit hard to explain for, I guess, people who are not in the industry or like building games, but we've kind of been inverting the model in the sense that we're not, I was talking to you guys about this earlier, but we're just kind of like, we're not going to hold any expectations of the industry and kind of toe or like, toe the line, so to speak. But we've been doing just open playtests for a year now, and we haven't been putting any strings on them, letting people stream whatever they want. And our thought process is like we end up with a much more hardened game, right? Because people are coming in and breaking things early on, constantly and consistently breaking things. So we've had even before last month, we had 50, 60, 70,000 people already go through the game.
Nice.
So they've broken it, like we've seen how their systems will react, and we've been able to really harden the game. And in that respect, what we're trying to do is just build a really strong base and not worry about the bells and the whistles and the shiny things on top of that. And that's not normal. That's kind of inverted to the way the industry usually builds games, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, we'll fix the bits after. We're like, no, we want it to be super solid, super stable, and then we'll add all of the pretty stuff, which is just content at that point, right? It's just the imaginings and the design. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Nice.
Yep.
Mike, I think you had some questions as well.
Do it, man.
Have some questions.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
We'll get in the flow. We just need a few minutes.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, the flow of molasses. Tell us about the game a little bit. Like what was the idea of the game as
yeah. So I'm pretty well versed at going over this pitch now, I think. So it's definitely coalesced in my mind, and honestly, I don't think we could have solidified the ideas without doing that open testing. Because we were coming into it with a vague idea, we had a good framework, we knew that we had a strong PvP base, we had a really good core game loop, and again, we weren't telling ourselves we had a very good core game loop. I'm watching people stay online for 12 hours and play the core game loop over and over and over and over and over, right? So I'm like, okay, there's no question that game loop is compelling for a certain type of player.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But we didn't know, really, where do these, the arms of the game. What are they going to reach to? What's it going to look like? It's funny. I always say that you can't take a game personally when you're building it, and you can't get too attached to it, and you cannot make it your identity. Because it is a living, breathing creature, and it's not going to grow how you want, and it's not going to look like what you expect. So if you really attach yourself to it, you'll make a lot of mistakes. Pride will get in your way, things like that will get in your way, and you'll think it's about you, and it's not. It's about the game growing. It's about paying attention to the customer or the player, and seeing what pisses them off or what doesn't piss them off. So our policy was we'll just keep gathering grievances until we've run out of grievances. So that's what we've been doing for the last year. It's like, what pisses you off? And we just get rid of it or change it or modify it till it doesn't come up in our feedback anymore. And then we've whittled it down to a pretty finite feedback. And we have this kind of internal thinking that if the feedback, the negative feedback is that you want more depth in content, awesome. Because that's easy to add. If the feedback is you're not interested in the game loop at all, or you simply don't enjoy the game at all, we've got a problem. Like, we should just stop making the game immediately, which every studio should have a policy for this, but doesn't. And you should just wrap it up and move on to the next idea, right? Because not all games are good, not all ideas are good.
Yeah.
But when you're attached to it and you've got your kind of your psyche or your personality attached to an idea, you're not going to do that. You're not going to. You're going to want to.
Literal definition of beating a dead horse.
Well, it's the fallacy of sunk costs. Yeah.
And you don't want to kill your baby. Like, you don't want to kill your own child. But that's why I was like, it's a little bit crass, but I always treat the levels I build, because I'm primarily an environment designer. That's my role. World composition. I always have this saying that I treat them like abortions. And it's hard to understand why I use that terminology, but it's because I have to completely detach from them after I'm done, because I put so much of myself into them.
Yeah.
If I keep that attachment, it's going to be painful for me.
Sure.
Like, I'm going to actually take a confidence hit watching people play the level. So if I'm attached to it, I'm dead. I'll just be curled in a ball crying, at home. But as soon as I abort, so to speak, because that's what it feels like. It's like cutting an umbilical, and I put it out in the wilds, and I'm like, now it's got to survive.
Yeah.
That's actually okay. I can deal with that. I can deal with that with my own psyche and my own ego. So that's the way I think of this process. So we've been basically we've been using that whole philosophy for the game, which is, again, highly abnormal in the video game industry. It's like, fine, we'll just throw it all out into the wilds, and if it lives, it lives. And we'll help it live. We'll nurture it. But it's on its own. Really, it's largely on its own, and we're just there as the mother figures or the father figures. But we're not attached for the wrong reasons, I suppose.
Sure.
So I think it's given a lot of people a little bit of pause or hesitation. I think even putting it out in early access, they're like, well, you're not going to get many players right now. So yeah, we know. We're well aware of that.
Still, you're getting 50 to 60 new Discord editions every day now, right?
Yeah, something in that ballpark. We're doing about 100 copies a day, and probably, honestly, right now, 35% of those to 37 are refunds. That's still 60 new people a day.
That's really respectable.
Nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, for a small team built on, UE5. What are you on? 5.4 at this point?
5.3, yeah.
Okay.
So it's hard for people to have perspective, because coming from the industry as a whole, they have expectations.
Yeah.
That a game needs to be this big at this point. But that's, if you look at all the indie lineage, and I had this long list I wrote out the other day for somebody as an answer to their review in Steam. And I was like, I could list probably 20 games that are essentially evergreen or nearly evergreen. Meaning RimWorld, Terraria, Squad, all of these games. And then the title that they're using as a comparison for my title is a game that dries up in 6 months. And and we won't even be talking about a year from now, like Delta Force, for example, the new one. It's like in 12 months we won't be talking about that game, because they'll have, in order to continue to make money, they'll have chicken suits and fucking hot dogs running around and whatever it takes, right?
Yeah.
I constantly say how like I am more willing to play a game that is full price or even just reduced price that doesn't have microtransactions at all and doesn't have like a free to play. Because when I was super stoked when they announced the new Delta Force. Big fan of the original, big fan of Black Hawk Down, the game. When they announced that, I was super juiced, and then it's like, oh, it's free to play. I'm like, I'm not even going to bother. I'm not even going to look at it.
And that
didn't have to be the end of it though. Man, that did not have to be the end of it. They could have said it's free to play and then made a good game.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, but like so many times they go free to play and then it's like, again, I said this about mobile games, right? Like I'd rather buy a mobile game than play a free one because of all the other mechanics. Like it's a question of, well, where are you making your money then if the game's free, right? And there's got to be some monetizing there because it's a job, it's development. I mean, 100%. How long did you years. So it's not that I'm against free to plays completely because I love Warframe. I think Warframe's great. But like a lot of the models are just very predatory or just designed to just not be great. So
not very predatory, absolutely predatory.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean
they're hiring psychologists at this point and addiction experts at EA.
Yeah.
They have addiction experts who work in EA. Yeah. Wonder why they're there.
Me too.
A
real mystery.
I avoid doing, according to an addiction specialist. They give them a list and then they just do everything on the list.
Yeah. I think I've developed. I used to have one rule for in my modern era of gaming, and it was, unfortunately, I hate to single Tarkov out here, but it was the one that kind of inspired me for this rule. And I have one rule: I will never, and I mean never, pay for inventory in a game.
Yeah,
that's my rule.
Yeah.
Inventory is you can just give me the fucking inventory. I do not need to pay you for it. But I've got another rule now that's just come apart in the last year. If a game needs more than one currency, I will not play it.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you put a second or a third currency, you're doing that to obfuscate, arbitrage and basically milking whales. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
There's no good reason to have more than one currency in a video game.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a microtransaction thing in most cases.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. So you mentioned Tarkov. I have to ask, have you, just out of curiosity, I'm a huge fan of extraction shooters, which is part of why, we're talking. I love EXFIL. I started my PC gaming career on the original Counter-Strike and personally loved like the one death style of gameplay where it's super realistic. So I love that about EXFIL. Have you played Stalker 2 at all? Or are you a fan of the original? Did you ever play that?
Oh,
franchise?
a big fan for sure.
Nice.
You know what's funny though? For some reason I missed the memo that it wasn't going to be multiplayer with the
There
new
is
one.
a multiplayer coming. It's just releasing post-launch.
To make one.
See, okay, so I thought that it was multiplayer, and then when it came out, I was like, wait, it's not multiplayer. Yeah. Because that was my big hook. I was always thinking it was Stalker. I was like, man, imagine if it was multiplayer.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool, right?
So there will be, there's no word yet on when that's coming, but they did just push a pretty massive patch. I think it was like 150 gigs of fixes and changes and stuff like that.
I think the story's the same across all of these games, and I don't think I'm wrong in saying this. Nowadays, the engines are so complex, the requirements and the things you need to hit are so hard. Studios need to be putting out games to testers way sooner.
I agree.
They need to be fire testing these games. Fine, it can be behind closed doors, but you need thousands of people through that game. Don't worry about the revenue, because that's what they didn't do with Stalker, and it's one of the things that has been it was completely unnecessary. It could have been a much more hardened game.
Between Russ and I, we both had vastly different experiences, and we both have pretty decent, if not fully high-end gaming computers.
Right.
We have the same CPU. I mean, mine's a laptop with like a eGPU setup, but like we have the same generation CPU, and he's on an AMD graphics card. I'm on an NVIDIA 4090. And my experience was just fucking awful.
Yeah,
every time I moved my mouse, my frame time would just stagger, and my frame rate would go all the way down from like 120 to like 30 frames per second. And the second I stopped moving my mouse, it would fix itself. And then he had like
nothing.
Some physics issues, if anything, and it was like minor shit.
Yeah, it's kind of wild.
So do you think if they had put that in front of 10,000 people, let's say early on, even if you just give us chapter 1, put it in front of 10,000 people, they would have known that and they would have been able to fix it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they either didn't know and didn't fix it, or they knew and knew that they didn't have to fix it.
Yeah. It's kind of a callback to when we started doing this, and Russ, Tim, and I had a conversation of, it seems like lately what devs are doing is they're going for an 80-20 rule. So, as long as the game works for 80% of people,
Yeah.
we can worry about the 20% of people later on.
And they're doing
it's really
that.
shitty that this is the way it's doing.
But I think
it's going.
I think it's almost certain that they're doing it under duress as well.
Yeah.
They're not doing it because they have a choice.
Strix also mentioned here in chat too. He said that the situation in Ukraine might have played a role in how that game released the situation, which is completely viable. But it blew me away to hear so many people having so many issues, because I experienced near none. So
interesting.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of frame rate drop in some areas, but no game breaking glitches, nothing like that for me personally. That a door will occasionally not open if I'm like pressed against it. So weird stuff like that, but nothing by any means what everybody else has experienced. But I want to circle back to EXFIL and you talked about how you've got to let this go into the wild and let people experience it. One thing I've always kind of disagreed with fan bases on is the armchair developers that are out there. I'm not a fan of people telling people how to develop their games. And I've been kind of curious if you've had anybody in your Discord or come to you and be like, well, you should change this and make it this. And I think it would be not so much helpful feedback, but that kind of this is the way I want this game to be.
I'm sure you know the answer.
Yes.
This is a real question.
I even did it too at one point.
But
you mean, sorry, wait. Do you mean unsolicited advice? I heard that's free.
So what I'm getting at is how have you guys handled that? What is kind of your go-to to I don't know, push those guys aside, or do you actually take into consideration those criticisms, and kind of how do you guys move forward from there? Because I know it's something every dev faces.
Yeah, it's a whole topic by itself. As somebody who worked in squad, I was often added to groups in Steam called "Go Kill Yourself," and things of and it's not a joke, because you're in the wind tunnel and you're under pressure, right?
Sure.
And then you wake up in the morning and all you want to do is make people happy, and you've been added to a Steam group called "Go Kill Yourself" for the 10th time. Okay, and you go to Steam and you report it, and you know what Steam will do about it?
Huh?
Nothing. They don't care.
Fucking hell.
So if you want to, I remember that incident specifically because I remember waking up one morning and just being really exhausted, but being like, I always try to convert people, especially the ones, the more negative they are, the more I want to talk them through it and kill them with kindness, right? Or at least have them come try it.
Sure.
Because if you can try it and walk away and say all the things that you preconceived were right, then I'm probably a fuck up anyway. I've already failed, right? But I woke up. It was a random morning, and I'm in this group, and somebody messages like, "You really just need to go kill yourself."
Jesus.
And I'm not somebody I don't suffer from depression really, or have that kind of thing. But I remember that moment being like, "What a fucking useless industry."
Yeah.
That you think that's even mildly acceptable, at any level. So my philosophy has always been, for some reason, the industry thinks it's not a workplace, or that people are not, this is not their job. I just treat it like a store. If you can come into my store and act a way, that is the way you need to act in my store, which is my Discord.
Sure.
That I'm at work there. So if you can't, if you would have got arrested and thrown out of the store for acting away, then that is the same rules that apply in my Discord. I think it's the only way to keep ourselves sane, man. We have to be cutthroat about it, and that's just business. That's just business. That's not anti-gamer or anything of that respect. That's just simply levels of respect, right? Social contract, essentially, which I talk about a lot. Sorry, but yeah, man, all the time, constant. And I will say, there's a funny side of this too, because there's a certain type of person in the gaming industry who wants to come, and they will write you a love letter, long list of all the reasons you're going to fail. and it will be really objective. It's usually somebody who's quite like on the spectrum or something, right?
Sure.
And they're maybe sometimes they're actually trying to be helpful. Usually not. Usually it's really kind of aggressive and offensive.
Sure.
But it'll be exhaustive. It'll be like an exhaustive list of grievances. Those are actually pretty good, because those are usually pretty insightful into the things that you might not be doing great in your game that you need to improve on. And you can get a lot, go back to those guys, you can get a lot of information that's probably quite useful, right? So I get one of those, I'm like, yay, I can go back and talk to this guy, and usually usually become friends, right?
Yeah.
But there's also, that those guys are also great motivation. The ones who really crap on you, the harder they crap, the more motivated I get.
Nice.
That's just like fuel for my fire, man.
Hell yeah.
And I'm like, come on. I'm like, pour it in, bro. Pour it in. Because we really faced this with Squad. We were, for the first 2 years, we were an Insurgency clone. Like every single day, I got that. Insurgency clone for probably 2 years of my life. And they were like, this game's shit. It only has 600 players. There's only 5 full servers. We couldn't even get 3 full servers at one point, right?
Wow.
And then we're like, and again, it's our first time through that experience, so we were uncertain, I suppose, or we didn't know as much about the industry, but we were just like one customer at a time, just keep driving it, and we made it through that. So doing it again now in the EXFIL experience, no problem. I'm like, I've heard everything at this point. So just bringing it full circle is, when we decided to go to early access, we're like, we didn't have big expectations. And again, it was kind of intentional. Interestingly, none of the griefers showed up, which is amazing. That's fantastic. Like, they just didn't show up. Like, we came and played the first couple days, lots of people on, lots of servers, no griefers. Because I think they thought it was so uncool they couldn't be caught even griefing us. And we're like, yes, victory, right? So yeah, this is an example of what I'm saying about we're playing on this idea of inverting the model, right? We just won't play. We won't play the game. We just refuse to do it. So
good for you
Strix
guys.
in the chat just equated you to Palpatine.
Yeah.
What's that? Sorry?
He said, yes, good. Let the hatred flow through me.
Yeah.
Darth Sidious over here.
I always think about it as becoming a force of nature. So like, you become the wind when you have a certain amount of motivation and also the certain amount of like support. You just become a force of nature, and then there's no stopping you, right? Like, you're just.
It's also really good that you kind of, without specifically pointing out, you kind of touch on the psychology of it. Like, there's a difference between someone giving you that like love letter of like, this is what's wrong and this is why I hate this game.
Yeah.
Versus like what you said, like you were invited to like a
Go
group
kill
10
yourself.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like that brings me back to like our first interaction. Well, I think it was like a TikTok or something that I made. And the only complaint that I had was the game doesn't scale well to 20 or 32 by 9 ultra wide resolutions. And then the TikTok ended with me playing PUBG, because I was like, what other game doesn't scale well with ultra wide resolutions? PUBG. I just cut to that.
Yeah.
But that was also one of those things where it's like, from my point of view, it was like a satirical, like, haha, this is kind of funny.
Yeah.
And you, obviously, with the way you're wording it, you took that and you probably put it on the list of issues to be worked on.
Yeah. And to be done properly, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the psychology and like the mindset behind that is really good to have in this industry, and it's unfortunate that a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
even in big corporations.
You touched on something around the psychology too. Is like, there's there's a certain amount of vulnerability that you need to maintain, but there's also a certain amount of armor you need to wear. And I would honestly say the amount of armor that I needed to, I would call it scar tissue, not armor even. The amount of scar tissue that I needed to wear to survive Squad was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And to this day, and it took me years to peel it off. Like years, man. Years of like, I had a personal coach and psychologist that I worked with for a couple of years, and that's all we did was peel off the scar tissue of that experience. And now I've come back to this, and I'm like, first of all, I'm not willing to be the tip of the spear and be in the fire all the time, which I was when I was 10 years younger for some stupid reason. But I'm not nearly so easy to cut. Like I used to be a lot easier to cut, and I would just bear it. You just chunk down, and you're like, yeah, go ahead, hit me as hard as you can. Now I tend to dodge.
Yeah.
It's like,
So what I'm hearing is you had a class change from a barbarian to a rogue.
yes, I think that's what it was. Yeah. Or like a bull, basically.
Yeah.
Because I think I used to operate under that assumption that you could just out tough everybody, and you'll be successful, right? Which is it does work, but there's also something to getting older and being a bit smarter.
Yeah.
And just being able to killing with kindness is by far my best weapon.
Nice.
It's
one that I still struggle with personally. I think the closest experience I have to something like that, it by no means compares, is back when we ran the website and we were doing written reviews, like I was telling you before the podcast. I wrote a review for Battlefield 2 or Battlefront 2, Battlefront 2, the Star Wars game that everybody hated when it came out because it had microtransactions or loot boxes or whatever. And I actually got hate mail, like a legit death threat emailed to me, and I had it on my wall for a long time because I was one of the few people at the time who was like, no, this is a good game. Like as a shooter, solid foundation, great mechanics, everything. Like it's a good game. And people are like, oh, you fucking EA, like just chewing me out all over the place. I'm like, look, man, I'm going to stand by this. And, years later, people are like, oh, wow, Battlefront 2 is great. And I'm like, I know.
I was about to say, it's great now.
Yeah. It's again, nowhere near your experience, but I can totally understand that idea of having to bear down on that stuff.
Squad got absolutely trashed for years, absolute years. And in terms of its complexity and ability to deliver its vision, it was lap 1 in a 500 lap race, which it's still doing today, 10 years later. Like it's still not done, 10 years later. So when we looked at EXFIL in particular, first of all, getting together with Roberto, who's the primary partner on the project, he had developed this framework for a first-person shooter PvP. He didn't really know fully where he wanted to grow it yet. So when I came back out of I was working for the military for a few years. I took a year off, and then I came back to the video game industry, reconnected with him around that framework. And he asked me, where would you take this? So I thought about it for a while. I got into the code base and started looking at what he built, and it was pretty sophisticated. I was like, damn, dude, this is a really good base. Like, you've done some really amazing work here for a guy that doesn't work in the industry.
Nice.
So I was like, okay, fair dues. I'll give you my pitch, and I'll tell you what I would do with it. And it was a lot about again, not taking the expectations and taking a different path. I'll tell you the truth. It's probably unfortunate that we named it EXFIL, but we named it that before the extraction genre was going through the roof. Sure. And now we're like, fuck. Honestly, now we're just like, well, I have this marketing mentality, just like with Squad. People hated the name Squad, by the way, too. I was like, you just have to own it.
Yeah.
You have to fucking own your niche, and this is my niche, and it's gonna be ours. So it's kind of a tangential discussion, but anyway, I came back to Roberto and I said, number one, can't be 2 teams. It needs to be 3 to 4 teams, because already we give ourselves a brand new palette to work with, right?
Yep.
We got this brand new palette. Now I've got 4 teams. Boom. And I was like, for Roberto, is there anything that you're just married to and we cannot change, that he doesn't want to see change? And one of the things for him was maintaining the kind of hardcore side of it. And in his mind, that was one life.
Yeah.
One life. And I'm like, okay, great. That's one of our pillars.
I respect the hell out of that choice.
So it's one life. We have no respawns in anywhere in the game except for the range, where you can blow people up. So I was like, okay, that's a pillar. You have one life. You've got up to 4 teams depending on the game mode. And then we thought through, the military framing. We decided on PMCs because it's super flexible. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, well, what was one of the funnest kind of configurations like that I remember playing? And I was like, Battlefield 2, for sure. And each Battlefield 2, each faction had their own weapons.
Yep.
So you didn't get what you wanted. And immediately, the guys who did the original playtest were like, what do you mean I'm not going to get to choose whatever weapon I want? I was like, no, you're not. You're part of a faction. You're part of a team. you're part of the Dragons, the Bulls, the Tigers, or the Spartans, and you will play through their story and through their gear, and then you'll develop roles, and you'll define, I guess, your team, but you're gonna be within constraints. And I think it's funny that the industry's decided that constraints are kind of, I don't know, they don't serve everybody, or they don't serve a wide enough audience, I suppose.
Right.
Maybe that's what it is, right? Because I want what I want. I want what I want. I want canted sites, and I want this one on here.
Goddamn,
like,
consumerism, man. Just over consumerism.
Yeah, and then I go talk to the military guys, and I was like, would you ever, like, put a primary site, and if you had a backup site on top, would you put a canted site on the side? And they're like, fuck no. Of course not. Doesn't make any sense at all. In fact, tilting your weapon to fire will make you fire poorly. And I was like, okay, great.
Yep.
Answer. So, that kind of stuff. And it's funny, that's a really constant one, is canted sites.
Too many COD players.
Yeah, so we just decided we're just going to hold the line, and if people don't like it, then we lose. And I have a sentence I always use, is we'll just die on our own sword. So it's not your sword that's going to kill me. I'm going to die on my own sword. So that's up to me. That's my business. I will either succeed or fail. Say la vie. That's the way it's going to be, right?
Yeah.
So when we get reviews, I don't want to go into any details, but there's some reviews that are just like, don't make any sense at all from streamers and stuff like that, who obviously never touched the game. We don't even look at them.
I booted up the menu.
We just don't even look at them. We're just like, you obviously didn't play the game. You're trying to knock us down for some reason that is irrelevant to me. I'm going to die on my own sword anyway. I don't care how big you are. I'm going to live or die on my own sword. The biggest streamer in the world is not... They don't have the customer base that Steam has. That's what streamers don't understand.
Right.
They have like, I have 300,000 followers. It's like, yeah, Steam has 8 million eyeballs a second.
Yeah.
Good luck competing with that, right?
Yeah.
So we're just like, I mean, say whatever you want, dude. Yeah. So that's to finish up that topic. That's another element of that, is just dealing with the press, dealing with media, dealing with streamers and stuff. And we've just decided to kind of not.
Well, I appreciate you breaking your rule for us and being here with us today.
No. You guys are friendly. You guys are friendly territory.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm all for that stuff. It's just that if people are going to come out with, I don't know, it's, what it's like.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like, give me a list of all the tropes and then put them in a video. That's a lot of the reviews, right? Yeah.
So then my next question for you is, because obviously Russ and I haven't played since the testing phase.
Yeah.
What's changed since then? You said you have a partnership or publishing deal with MicroPose, I believe. Is the company. So
do either of you know who MicroPose is?
I do not.
So you've just obviously signaled how old you are. Because anybody who's my age or even close to my age, if you say MicroProse, they go like, if they're a man, they go, yeah, MicroProse, ooh.
It's a little bit before my time, I'll admit.
And if I was wearing a MicroProse shirt right now and I was walking in like a GDC, you would see this like age demographic of anybody who's 40 plus would be like, whoa, wicked shirt, dude. And everybody else would be like, that sounds like Microsoft. I swear to God. I'm gonna do it this year. By the way,
did he get a publishing deal with Microsoft earlier? Is that what he talked about? And I was like, I think it was called MicroProse.
Yeah. So MicroProse, for your background, was for your background due to your ignorance, was the largest sim video game maker.
I'll say myself out.
Yeah, the largest sim video game maker in the world for a long time.
Okay, very cool.
So they made like a Comanche attack helicopter pilot, all the original sim games. They were infamous for releasing the thickest manuals you could possibly find for their games. So I suspect there are games from MicroProse out there that had 500 pages in the manual. Like, that's how comprehensive these games used to be. And imagine the graphics were like in the 90s or late 80s.
Yeah. Because I remember what they were in the 90s, so I can only imagine what they were. I mean, I have some experience, right? Like, my dad had an Atari 6400 back in the day, but definitely was not as versed in that tech at that time. So.
Yeah, so that's their lineage anyway, and they've come back. They've changed hands. Sid Meier, their lineage goes back to Civilization, and
nice.
Sid Meier and some other. If you read them up on the wiki, you'll be like, holy crap!
Yeah,
what has that thing gone through? But they were acquired by a man named David Leggetti, who is actually one of the founders of Arma. So he came out of the Arma lineage. he kind of when the original company split in half, it became a military arm and a gaming arm. I believe he left with the military arm and took his portion of the ownership, and then he ended up leaving that at some point and creating a sim company in Australia. And he also has a whole world simulation engine called Titan IM, which is crazy. Like, it'll simulate the entire world,
Sick.
and you can just fly around it. You just fly around the whole world forever, continuously.
So Sid Meier was actually a founder of Microprose.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah,
That's cool.
Microprose.
I see that they did XCOM series as well. That's very cool.
Yeah. No, it's really deep. And then they're kind of coming full circle now. So he's taken over and owns Microprose, and they want to really build back into heavy sim. So they've been getting into stuff like there's a game Sea Power that they released recently. It's so deep, dude. It's like carrier and battleship simulations, and it's crazy. Like,
nice.
they could probably do a 500-page manual. And they also are the publisher of Ground Branch, if you're familiar with it. Yeah, so
I actually have it on. That's one of the first Rainbow Six Fork games that I've bought.
Yeah, so that published originally at the same time as Squad, so 10 years ago.
Wow.
So they took that under their wing, and it's become kind of one of the bookends of their catalog. So we had some background, or I was familiar with David. I didn't know him very well, but enough to contact him, and we know who each other are. So we got in contact with David, and after a little bit of discussion, we realized that, like, EXFIL is just a beautiful bookend for the other side of their library. Like Ground Branch on this side, which is very Rainbow Siege, tactical, peeking around the corners and everything. And then this big open world infantry game, which is EXFIL, which is the exact opposite of Ground Branch in that sense.
Yeah.
And even for me, I was like, man, that's just like, that's perfect. That really just clamps all of their stuff around like that. So we quickly got together and made a publishing deal. There's no ownership involved. We still have complete control, but they're in charge of all the marketing, and they will take all that over for us in the next couple weeks. We've been kind of slowly transitioning. And then we're going to collaborate with them on ways to, like, take Ground Branch along with us and vice versa. Maybe do some combined weekends and things of that nature.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
But again, since the moment they hopped in, they've just been massively supportive. From EXFIL's point of view, the big, for the gamers, the big thing is going to be they have an internal development studio, so we now have access to animators, artists, and all this stuff that we never would have had access to.
Huh.
Right, because we're going to be able 4 guys making this.
Yeah, we're 4 guys financing it ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to be able to leverage all of those internal resources. That makes this year massive. Like, they're ready to just, like, flex for us and just help us, make sure that we make it to our goals. We have really ambitious goals for 2025. Again, I was kind of getting to this earlier, but the way that we've structured this game, it is very digestible and very bite-sized for us to build. And it's intentional because I've spent 10 years watching Squad struggle to finish, essentially. So after coming out of that design process with Roberto, we packaged everything into a very intentional scope. So we're like, these are the borders of our scope. This is what we're building. And the goal is to get it on console as well. So it has to be very scoped and it has to be very intentional. So we kind of did ourselves a favor in many respects by putting barriers and a lot of limits around ourselves. You have to get more creative inside a smaller box, right? You have to, like, use your resources wisely. So we've been able to accelerate very fast, so changes you're going to, the original question was about changes. I don't think there's an area of the game that hasn't changed in the past 6 months. Nothing. Yeah, everything would have changed. Introduction of specific calibers to all the weapon systems. Penetration is fully modeled now. I have a beautiful clip of me killing 2 guys through the floor the other day.
Nice.
I just waited for them to walk to the edge of the platform, and it looked like an A10. Yeah. It looked like an A10 coming up through the floor. Just sparks. And then I waited for his buddy to come and just, like, burped him.
Nice.
Fucking amazing.
So weapon calibers, all differentiation. There's really quite a lot of difference in the bullets and the way that they're, I guess, just their relative strengths. and damage they do. So we're modeling each of these factions. It's funny, and this is for me, this is what I love, but I think gamers are kind of not used to it. Every faction is quite asymmetrical. Like, none of their DMRs will be balanced. They'll all be all over the place. Like, they'll have a light DMR, another faction's going to have a really heavy DMR. But then the Tigers, for example, have the entire AK series. So they have the AK 200, the modern series, essentially. And they'll be able to choose between all the different calibers, so 5.45, 5.56, and 7.62. So they'll have this huge array of ARs to choose from. Whereas on the US, the Bulls are a US faction.
Okay.
They've got the new XM7, and they have a long barrel version and a short barrel version, and it only has a 20 round mag currently in the thing, so you have less ammo. But man, it's like, it punches like a little beast. So you
just shoot through. Yeah.
Yeah. So the amount of damage you can do to guys is significantly different. And then the big one I don't think you guys even played in was the armor system that we implemented. It uses the actual armor, so the armor
I think your mic
armor.
is cutting out a little bit.
Oh, sorry, bro. You got me now?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So the armor is the armor. The body plates where they are is what absorbs the shots. The helmet can deflect shots. The shoulder pads are actually partially deflective, and then there's actually a groin. I don't know what you call that, like that groin hang down bit that some heavy armor they wear.
Yeah,
that also will deflect shots and absorb damage. So we've really modeled that stuff to be a major factor, actually.
Awesome.
So where you get hit, and then headshots, necks, and upper, like above the chest line, is lethal.
Nice.
Dead.
Yeah.
So one
Good
shot
to
death.
know. So aim for the head or upper body. I mean,
if you can.
Stalker did a lot of that in the first one, and that was kind of one of the first shooters I played. So it made me very early on a big headshot guy, because in the original Stalker it was like conserve ammo, and so like
patience.
Call of Duty comes around and everybody's all obsessed with KD ratio, and mine's like 0.5, and they're like, oh, you suck. I'm like, yeah, but look at my headshot to kill ratio.
Yeah,
and they're like, holy shit,
right.
dude. It's like, yeah, I don't shoot unless I'm killing.
right. So I think we want to maintain that too, where it's like there's going to be the machine gunner and the sprayer. That's me. That's why the role I love playing.
Sure.
But we never want to take away that reward for being a patient, good shooter.
Yeah.
And that will never go away. So if you get that headshot, it's beautiful. The guy folds in half. He's like, I did it today. I was watching one of our guys next to me, and he just dinked across the river, and the guy just got hit, and he went fold, and just like smeared himself into the ground, and we were like, wow, that was beautiful. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you get those moments too. Yeah.
So long story short, everything has changed in the last 6 months.
Yeah, and it's not going to stop. That's the whole point. Yeah, it's not going to stop.
Yeah, it's a whole new game.
Yeah,
nice. So like I don't know how many more questions Mike has. I just have a quick one I kind of want your opinion on. So this year at the VGAs, I don't know if you watched or paid attention at all, we saw the first ever like single developer game get a nomination for Game of the Year, Balatro, right? Like I haven't played it myself. Yeah. My brother's a big fan, but like, how does that make you feel as like a smaller dev? That's a huge award to be given out potentially to a single person. Like what are your kind of thoughts? How did you feel seeing that nomination? I don't know if you care about awards or kind of what your thought is there, but that was pretty groundbreaking in my opinion.
I think if you were to take my list of games that I love, and they're in my top, let's say my top 50 games of all time, or even the top 10, they're going to be almost exclusively indies anyway. Probably at least 6 or 7 of them at least. So the fact that a single man made indie game hasn't won yet is kind of surprising to me, because the amount of titles, I guess they're judging it by volume or something, but like, I don't know. Welcome to marketing. Right. Battlefield sells a lot. Doesn't mean it's a great game.
Agreed.
So there we are, right? I almost would say that it's a kind of it's funny because those game awards have become so big, they don't match what's happening in the industry.
Sure.
Which is when I interviewed somebody the other day, by the way, for a community manager role, I said, how would you describe the video game industry right now to somebody who's not in the video game industry but is very savvy about business? And he said, the fall of Rome.
That's a good one. That's really good.
And I was like, Yeah.
Did that man
So-
or woman get the job?
Potentially, yeah. And then it's like, and then I see the awards, and I'm like, bread and circuses.
Yeah.
What is like? Where is the money coming from? Like, people can't pay their rent, and everybody's getting dressed up to. I don't know, man. It's a tough one. It's a tough
Yeah.
one.
I have mixed feelings about it as well, but it kind of makes me
Yeah.
hope that maybe the larger industry is realizing, and they're kind of waking up that, yeah, indies do make great games. I mean, there's like you said, a ton of them. I mean, the first one that comes to my mind is Blasphemous, just because it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder if the industry is finally taking note that, like, you don't have to make crazy over the top high budget games to make something good that can sell and be well loved.
But I think somebody said it really well. Is they're at the same time they don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like the AAA's, they see this and they're like, wait a second, how do we do that?
Uh-huh.
Huh?
It's
but we have the
decisions versus people who actually love making games and love games.
And that same fucking like, wait, how do we do that?
Yeah.
Immediately brings me back to The Division Heartland, which again I told you earlier before we started the podcast. I can fucking go on a rant forever.
Keep it short.
The game was finished. The game was fucking done, and it was fantastic. It would have been the perfect evolution from the Division 2 to still stay separate from the Division 3. And it was free to play. Like, it was perfect. And I don't say that about Ubisoft
ever.
Just often. Just fucking ever.
Yeah.
And then they're like, X-Defiant is going to be the better game. So they cancel fucking Division Heartland when it was launch ready. Like, they could have literally just pushed it and it would have been done. And now X-Defiant's closing down in January 2015.
Yeah.
Or 2025. Sorry. January 2025, X-Defiant's closing down. So it's like, this whole time you had this golden child of a fucking game because Division 1 and Division 2 players, hundreds of millions of players, were ready to jump into this.
Yeah.
From the get-go. From the announcement at, what was it, like E3, like 5 fucking years ago or something like that?
It makes you wonder what conversation happened internally, right?
Yeah.
I think it's just a bunch of people in suits in a conference room were like, this isn't going to make any money. X-Defiant looks good. Let's go with that one. There's a bunch of money.
Yeah.
And then now 2025 is coming around. And they're like, yeah, we're going to close down the servers. All the people that wanted to play your next free-to-play game were looking at the other fucking game.
It's really tough, though, because you can always, like, I can't always assume, well, I guess both ways, but I always have to assume there's some good intent in the boardroom. Because
that's what I like to hope, too.
I've been in boardrooms, and they never speak of bad intent, typically. Like, it might be a bit of framing and a bit of smoke and mirrors, but... So it's really hard sometimes to understand those decisions. But then again, having been in the boardroom and been in those kind of seats before, sometimes the whole story is not obvious, Yeah. And there's a lot more going on than you think. And it could be quite political too, actually.
Yeah.
I appreciate that perspective.
I like to imagine.
Yeah.
I like to imagine with AAA titles, when they go in boardrooms, they usually walk in there with 3 potential titles. And the people that are funding will just pick the one of the 3 that looks the most promising. And I guess in this case, it would have been X-Defiant, which, again, January 2025. How's that going to go?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it sounds funny to say, but you can also A/B test things. You can just put them out in the market and see how it does. That's why I find this stuff always a little bit weird. They did do that?
I forget what the exact number was, but X-Defiant's closed beta and Heartland's closed beta were happening at the same time. Heartland was getting more attention. It was getting more people that were playing in the closed beta and getting more signups. And then when the open betas rolled around, it was, again, I think they were like within a week of each other. Heartland had more open beta, like consecutive players, and X-Defiant had about the same as the closed beta in terms of like actual players and not just signups.
Yeah.
So that should have been enough to tell you that, like, hey, if Heartland's up here, we should have picked this one. X-Defiant's over here.
Yeah. So we are running up on the hour here pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So we are going to wrap this up and move over to our Patreon side, guys. If you haven't checked out our Patreon podcast, it's patreon.com/CoinDropPod. We're going to do a little bit of extra talking over there. Iron Taxi is going to be joining us over there and sharing some interesting perspective on well, his experience with Tencent in light of some recent news, because you
Yes.
kind of hinted at it here, Iron Taxi, but why don't we go ahead and say it outright for the friends in chat? What exactly did you fill in the role when working on Squad?
So I was one of the two primary founding members, and then there was about another 12 founders, and then I was the CEO for the first about 3 years in the company. So I was like essentially one of the two founding partners.
So definitely
many years ago.
Yeah,
yeah.
Definitely one of the main guys.
I was deeply involved. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
So we're going to head over to our Patreon. Thanks again, everybody. I do want to say real quick before we go, we're going to take the next 2 weeks off to kind of regroup, kind of reevaluate our streaming and kind of what we do. So there will not be an
Holidays
episode.
and all that.
Yeah, not be an episode for the next 2 weeks as well, in lieu of holidays like Christmas and New Year's and all that good stuff. But check out our Patreon. And before we go, Iron Taxi, do you have anything you want to plug and kind of tell the community?
No, I mean the big thing is EXFIL's out there now. You can come play it. We're filling up a server every day, and we're iterating rapidly on the game. And the people who are in there, we're having a blast. Like we're sitting in there playing 8 or 12 hours. If you like that style of game and you love the teamwork side of it, come give it a try. If it doesn't meet your level in 2 hours, refund it. That's totally fine. We're totally for it, right? But I'll tell you, man, we're having some experiences I haven't had in a long time.
Nice.
Some really, really fun gaming experiences.
I do know that I personally enjoyed what I played, so I'd love to check it out again. Mike, did you have some final thoughts?
Yeah, I do still have some questions, but obviously we need to go to the Patreon side. So for those of you that don't subscribe to our Patreon, it's $3 a month, less than a cup of coffee. I'm going to try and squeeze a couple more of these questions that could potentially be very interesting into the Patreon side before we get on to the 10-cent stuff. And also tell your mom I said hi.
Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.